Hello, my name is Shanti Chu, and I teach philosophy full time. And I like to think of myself as a public applied philosopher because most of the students that I'm teaching are not philosophy majors. And so, in order to make it relevant to them, I think it's really important to consider how philosophy can be applied to our own lives outside of our careers, and of course, including our careers. And I think that Philosophy for Girls is such a great public facing applied project that also can help philosophy be more applicable and inclusive towards people of multiple gender identities, racial identities, etc. And so, with Philosophy for Girls, I'm just absolutely honored to be a part of this project because it really gets at the heart of some of the tensions within philosophy and how it hasn't always and still isn't necessarily friendly to people who aren't cis straight white men. And having a book about philosophy called Philosophy for Girls, I think, is a way of really interrogating some of the problems that have been a part of philosophy for so long. And Philosophy for Girls, I think that the idea of girls also helps make philosophy more of an inclusive discipline for people who are studying it, whether it's in high school, college, outside of those structures, who identify as a girl or who identify as a woman, right? And to try to think about, okay, well, how does philosophy apply to me as a person, right? How does it serve me as someone who is a girl, as someone who is a woman? And part of philosophy's problem is that a vast majority of recognized and appreciated and valued philosophers have been white men, and also the topics have not been about gender in terms of how it impacts us and our identities. And so that's why Philosophy for Girls is really challenging that, and that's why I said I'm very excited and honored to be a part of this project. So my chapter is about multiracial identity intersecting with gender, intersecting with sexual orientation, and this idea of queerness, and not really being able to fit neatly into a box or neatly into a category or even two categories, but really kind of interrogating that idea that you can only identify with one race or one sexuality or one gender. And also thinking about, while race, gender, sexuality are different types of identities, right? They seem to be categorically different. There's still some sort of intersectionality in terms of perhaps the otherness that one can feel when one doesn't neatly identify as solely one race or one gender or one sexual orientation. And I specifically grapple with Frida Kahlo's experiences. My chapter starts off with discussing Frida Kahlo's multiracial identity. Her identity is also being a queer woman. And then I map that onto our contemporary society with the increase in more people who are multiracial, multi-ethnic, multicultural. And so to be able to discuss this in a philosophy book is so important because it helps people who are reading this to think, oh my gosh, I'm not all alone. And I think for me personally, when I was studying philosophy, in college and grad school, I felt really alone in terms of the topics that were discussed, in terms of the authors that were discussed, in terms of what's viewed as legitimate philosophy. And I wholeheartedly feel that public philosophy, applied philosophy about identity is legitimate philosophy. So to be able to have this chapter on this topic and then also integrate theorists like Linda Alcoff, Sarah Ahmed into thinking about how we can create our own identities with respect to not only being one race or one sexual orientation, but as subjective human beings, as conscious beings, we can define who we are. We can define what our identities are outside of those kind of rigid structures of society that are built to not serve people like us. And also thinking about how multiracial identity can be a way of grappling with otherness in terms of being creative and thinking about, okay, well, I don't necessarily fit into one type of way of existing, but how can I create my own ways of existing? And I think that's where Gloria Anzaldua's essay is so kind of meaningful and provocative with Borderlands La Frontera. So it's been so incredible to be able to put these specific authors in conversation with one another and also be able to talk about my own experiences. And the editors of this were just so incredible to work with, and I felt like I had so much freedom in being able to write about this topic in a way that I personally grapple with, but I also hope that the readers of this book can really connect with it, whether it's because one is multiracial or not identifying in a way that seems to be or that seems to fit neatly into the pre-existing categories of our society.